35 and still single? Wow, Christmas must be pretty lonely, my sister said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Everyone at the dining table laughed, and my father smiled, waving his hand casually as he said, "She's just joking, Emery." I quietly put my drink down, looked my father dead in the eye, and said, "Don't worry about me, Dad. I've been married for a long time." My dad froze mid-smile, his glass halting halfway to his mouth as the color drained completely from his face. "My name is Emery Rojas." To understand why a 7-word declaration at a Christmas Eve dinner shattered a multi-million-dollar corporate empire in Charlotte, North Carolina, you have to look into the toxic, calculated dynamics of the Rojas family. For my entire life, I was treated as the unglamorous, dependable workhorse of our family, while my younger sister, Kendra, was treated like royalty. Our family built its fortune through Rojas Logistics and Commercial Infrastructure Holdings, a massive regional freight, warehousing, and supply chain corporation headquartered in downtown Charlotte. The company was co-founded 30 years ago by my late mother, Madeline Rojas, and my father, Gideon Rojas. Madeline was the true strategic genius behind the business, designing the automated logistics frameworks that secured dozens of lucrative state and commercial contracts across the Southeast. When my mother passed away 10 years ago after a sudden illness, my life changed drastically. Gideon assumed the role of chief executive officer, while I worked 18-hour days in the operational trenches, managing terminal logistics, regulatory compliance, and corporate fleet management. Despite my executive title as chief operating officer, Gideon paid me a modest fraction of market value, constantly reminding me that I should be grateful to serve the family legacy. Kendra, on the other hand, was elevated into a life of effortless extravagance. At 29, Kendra held a vanity title of Executive Brand Ambassador, a position created solely to justify her 6-figure salary, unlimited company credit cards, and luxury travel expense accounts. Kendra spent her days hosting socialite parties, buying high-end European sports cars, and launching failed luxury fashion lines in Miami and New York, all bankrolled directly by the company's revenue streams. To justify why Kendra was showered with wealth while I was burdened with endless labor, Gideon and Kendra weaponized my personal life. Because I spent my late 20s and early 30s working tirelessly to keep our shipping terminals profitable, I didn't spend my weekends in high society nightlife. Gideon and Kendra relentlessly mocked me for being an unattractive, awkward workhorse. At every family gathering, holiday dinner, and board social, Kendra would make cutting remarks about my age, my clothing, and my lack of a romantic life. Gideon would chuckle along, reinforcing the narrative that I was a bitter, lonely woman who had nothing in her life except her job. They used this public belittling as a psychological tactic to keep my self-esteem low, ensuring I would never question corporate financials or demand my fair share of the equity. What my father and sister did not realize was that their cruel narrative rested on an absolute foundation of lies, and I had known the truth for 5 full years. The turning point occurred 5 years ago during a digital audit of our company's archived legal vaults. While transferring historic corporate deeds to a secured cloud platform, I stumbled upon a restricted file labeled the Madeline Rojas Irrevocable Testamentary Trust. Curious, I opened the file and spent the next 3 hours reading through my late mother's certified estate charters. What I discovered was breathtaking. My mother, Madeline, had seen right through Gideon's greed and Kendra's reckless irresponsibility long before she died. In her irrevocable trust charter, Madeline left her 50% controlling equity in Rojas Logistics and a $28 million liquid investment portfolio in a specialized testamentary trust. The trust charter contained a mandatory, unbreakable legal trigger. The moment I turned 35 years old, or the moment I entered into a legally binding marriage, whichever occurred first, 100% of Madeline's corporate equity and liquid capital would instantly vest under my exclusive administrative authority. Furthermore, the charter stipulated that upon the execution of this trigger, an immediate, mandatory forensic audit had to be conducted on all corporate books, freezing the trustees' administrative powers until all past distributions were fully reconciled. Gideon was appointed as the temporary trustee only while I remained under 35 and unmarried. For 10 years, Gideon had deliberately suppressed the existence of this trust. He and Kendra spent a decade publicly humiliating me about being single, actively discouraging me from dating and painting me as an unlovable workaholic because they believed that as long as I remained unmarried, Gideon could retain total control of the company until my 35th birthday, at which point he planned to alter the corporate bylaws through fraudulent proxy votes. When I uncovered that trust charter 5 years ago, my initial impulse was to explode with rage, confront my father, and demand my inheritance. But I knew that if I confronted Gideon prematurely, his high-priced corporate attorneys would stall the trust execution in civil court, hide offshore accounts, or attempt to alter corporate records. Instead, I sought discreet legal representation from one of the premier corporate risk and federal compliance attorneys in North Carolina, Alexander Cole. When I first walked into Alexander's office in downtown Charlotte, I expected a cold, formal legal consultation. What I found was a brilliant, razor-sharp attorney who listened to my story with profound empathy, respect, and quiet outrage at how I had been treated. Over the next 6 months, Alexander analyzed every line of my mother's trust charter. As we worked late into the evenings reviewing corporate filings and bank statements, a deep, genuine connection blossomed between us. Alexander saw me for who I truly was, a brilliant, resilient, and deeply caring woman who had been systematically exploited by the people who were supposed to love her. 4 years ago, Alexander and I were married in a beautiful, quiet civil ceremony overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. We decided to keep our marriage completely secret from my family and the public. Alexander's federal audit team advised us that by keeping our marriage hidden while accumulating detailed forensic paper trails of Gideon's corporate management, we were setting a master trap. For 4 years, while Gideon and Kendra believed I was a lonely, pathetic single woman sitting at home on weekends, I was living a life of extraordinary love, warmth, and luxury with my husband Alexander in a private estate just 20 miles outside the city. During those 4 years, Alexander's forensic team quietly documented every illegal transaction executed by Gideon and Kendra. We discovered that Gideon had illegally embezzled $14 million from my mother's trust reserves to pay off Kendra's failed Miami fashion ventures, clear personal gambling debts, and purchase offshore real estate in the Caribbean, forging my mother's estate signatures on distribution vouchers. Dayan was waiting for my 35th birthday to execute a fraudulent corporate amendment that would permanently transfer my mother's voting shares to Kendra, claiming I was mentally unfit and socially isolated. He had no idea that my 35th birthday was the exact trapline we had laid out 5 years ago. That brings us to tonight, Christmas Eve at the exclusive Ballantine Country Club in Charlotte. Gideon's had rented out the grand private dining room, inviting 30 of our company's highest-profile shareholders, board members, city council representatives, and executive partners. On the surface, the dinner was billed as an annual holiday celebration. In reality, Gideon intended to announce a major corporate restructuring that evening, officially naming Kendra as the executive vice chair of the board while demoting my operational authority. The dining room was magnificent, adorned with massive crystal chandeliers, towering pine trees, silver table settings, and endless flows of vintage champagne. Gideon sat at the head of the long oak table, dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, holding court with our lead investors. Kendra sat beside him, dripping in diamond jewelry, wearing an emerald designer dress, drinking heavily, and boasting to the board members about her upcoming luxury trip to St. Bart's. I sat near the middle of the table, dressed in a simple, elegant dark velvet gown, quietly observing the room like a grandmaster watching chess pieces move into final position. Halfway through the third course, Kendra tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, standing up to command the attention of all 30 guests. "I'd like to propose a toast to family and success," Kendra announced loudly, her voice slurred slightly with arrogant amusement. She turned her eyes toward me, her face twisting into that familiar, condescending smirk she had used against me for decades. "And of course, a special toast to my big sister, Emery," Kendra said, elevating her voice so every shareholder and executive in the room could hear. 35 and still single? Wow, Christmas must be pretty lonely." A chorus of polite, awkward laughter rippled across the high society dinner table. Several board members looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Gideon leaned back in his leather armchair, swirling his cognac, a broad, patronizing smile spreading across his face. He waved his hand dismissively in my direction, saying, "She's just joking, Emery. You know how your sister is. Don't take it to heart." The room quieted down, waiting for me to duck my head, force a tight smile, and absorb the humiliation as I had done for years. Instead, I slowly reached down, picked up my cloth napkin, and dabbed my lips. I set my wineglass down on the white tablecloth with a firm, deliberate click that echoed across the quiet room. I looked my father dead in the eye, my voice dropping into an ice-cold, calm register that cut through the ambient music like a diamond blade. "Don't worry about me, Dad. I've been married for a long time." My dad froze mid-smile. The glass of cognac in his hand halted inches from his mouth. His eyes widened into circles of absolute terror, and every single drop of color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost sitting at the head of the table. Kendra's condescending smirk evaporated instantly. What did you just say, Emery? What kind of stupid joke is that, Emery?" "It's not a joke, Kendra," I said smoothly, standing up from my chair and smoothing down my velvet gown. At that exact moment, the heavy double oak doors of the private dining room swung fully open. A tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit walked into the room carrying a leather briefcase, flanked by 2 senior officers from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and federal prosecutor Dominic Cross. It was my husband, Alexander Cole. The entire dining room went deathly silent as 30 high society guests turned their heads in shock. Alexander walked smoothly down the long carpeted dining hall, stopping right beside my chair. He gently placed a warm, protective hand on the small of my back, leaned down, and kissed me softly on the cheek in front of everyone. "Good evening, everyone," Alexander said, his deep, authoritative voice echoing across the room. "My name is Alexander Cole, Senior Managing Partner at Cole & Associates, and I am Emery's husband." Gideon's cognac glass slipped from his numb fingers, crashing against his porcelain plate, sending dark liquid and glass shards splashing across the white table linen. No, that's impossible," Gideon gasped, struggling to breathe as he pushed himself up from his chair. "She's not married. She's single. You can't be married." Alexander opened his briefcase, pulling out a certified, state-sealed legal portfolio and laying it flat on the center of the table directly in front of our board members. "Emery and I were legally married 4 years ago in Asheville, North Carolina," Alexander stated, his tone razor-sharp and absolute. "Under Section 8 of the Madeline Rojas Irrevocable Testamentary Trust, Emery's marriage automatically executed the full transfer of 50% controlling equity and $28 million in liquid capital into her exclusive name 4 years ago." Gasps of utter shock erupted across the table. 2 of our major institutional investors immediately reached forward, grabbing the certified court documents to read the trust terms. Furthermore, federal prosecutor Dominic Cross stepped forward, holding up a stack of federal arrest warrants and judicial seizure decrees. Because Gideon Rojas deliberately concealed the execution of this trust and embezzled $14 million of trust reserves over the past 4 years to finance illegal offshore accounts and unapproved corporate expenditures, the federal court has issued an emergency injunction. Dominic Cross looked directly at Gideon and Kendra. Gideon Rojas is hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer of Rojas Logistics effective immediately. All personal bank accounts, corporate credit lines, and luxury real estate assets registered under Gideon and Kendra Rojas have been frozen by federal order pending criminal indictment for grand wire fraud, corporate forgery, and felony tax evasion. Kendra let out a blood-curdling shriek of pure hysterical rage, dropping her champagne glass as she grabbed at the federal prosecutor's coat. "No, you can't freeze my accounts. I have a trip to St. Bart's tomorrow. Dad, do something. Tell them they can't do this." Gideon sank back down into his chair like a broken, hollow shell, his chest heaving, completely incapable of uttering a single word, as 30 of his most prominent business peers stared at him in absolute disgust and horror. The federal officers stepped forward, placing Gideon under formal arrest and escorting him out of the country club in handcuffs, while Kendra was escorted off the premises by security squad as she wept and screamed hysterically in her ruined emerald dress. The legal, corporate, and financial resolution was swift, absolute, and merciless. Facing undeniable forensic paper trails, recorded bank fraud, and forged estate vouchers meticulously documented by Alexander's team, Gideon Rojas entered a formal guilty plea to federal wire fraud and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional facility and ordered to pay full financial restitution to my mother's estate. Kendra's extravagant life collapsed overnight. Stripped of her corporate credit cards, her luxury vehicle allowances, and her trust dividends, she was forced to declare personal bankruptcy. Her luxury fashion assets and designer collections were seized and auctioned by court order. Facing widespread social ruin and complete financial insolvency, Kendra was forced to move into a modest studio apartment, taking an entry-level retail sales job to cover her basic living expenses. Meanwhile, I assumed sole, absolute leadership as the chief executive officer and majority owner of Rojas Logistics and Commercial Infrastructure Holdings. Under my direct leadership, our company underwent a complete ethical and operational transformation. Over the next 3 years, we expanded our supply chain terminals across 4 new states, increasing our annual revenue by 40% and establishing Rojas Logistics as one of the top commercial transport enterprises in the nation. Alexander and I welcomed our first child, a beautiful, healthy baby boy named Gabriel, filling our private mountain estate with endless warmth, laughter, and genuine family devotion. Using the recovered trust capital, I established the Madeline Rojas Women's Leadership and Economic Empowerment Fund, a $10 million philanthropic foundation that provides full university scholarships, business incubation grants, and executive mentorship for young women pursuing careers in logistics, engineering, and corporate law. Sitting on the wide wooden terrace of our mountain home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson over the Blue Ridge Mountains, while Alexander holds our baby son in his arms, I know with absolute certainty that true fulfillment isn't found in public approval. It is found in quiet integrity, unbreakable self-worth, and the courage to let the truth reclaim your life. Educational lesson. This narrative illustrates a fundamental principle regarding testamentary trusts, fiduciary obligations, and the psychological traps of corporate gaslighting. Narcissistic relatives often rely on emotional belittling and social isolation to suppress a victim's confidence, preventing them from investigating their true legal and financial rights. In corporate jurisprudence and estate law, conditional trust clauses, such as age thresholds or marital execution triggers, are legally binding and independent of emotional theater. When facing systemic family exploitation, quietly securing independent legal counsel and building verifiable forensic paper trails is far more effective than engaging in immediate public confrontations. Personal advice: if you are being subjected to persistent public humiliation, financial belittling, or emotional manipulation by family members who claim to act in your best interest, do not accept their false narrative as your reality. Maintain absolute composure, keep your personal achievements and life plans private, and verify all legal documents through independent, trusted professionals. When you possess the truth and the law on your side, you do not need to raise your voice. Allow objective evidence and official enforcement channels to dismantle your oppressors while you step gracefully into your own success.